Andrés Manuel López Obrador and endorsed by current President Claudia Sheinbaum, who has presented it as part of a broader push to democratize public institutions and make the judiciary more responsive to citizens. The Sheinbaum administration has also highlighted the widespread public distrust in the current judicial system, arguing that only structural change can restore legitimacy and public confidence. It's also worth noting that a Pew survey from earlier this year found that 2/3 of Mexicans approve of this new system. At the same time, however, the reform has sparked serious concerns, both within Mexico and abroad, about its impact on judicial independence, on the system of checks and balances, on the ability of organized crime to infiltrate the justice system. And critics also warn that it could undermine investor confidence, including from the United States. So as Mexico embarks on this unprecedented shift, today we're going to have the opportunity to explore how the new system is implemented in practice and potential safeguards to maintain independence. So I'm very much looking forward to a rich discussion about the reform, which represents the most significant change to Mexico's justice system since its democratic transition. And it's one that will have lasting implications for the rule of law, for governance, and for U.S. Mexico relations. We're fortunate to be joined by Alonso Zepeda, who's going to be with us to moderate today's discussion. Alonso is a lawyer specializing in constitutional, administrative, and electoral litigation. His experience has afforded him deep understanding of Mexico's political and institutional judicial context, as well as the broader context of the rule of law, the broader state of the rule of law. Alonso, over to you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. It is an honor to be considered by the dialogue in this webinar. Well, as you were saying, we will have more than 1,600 judicial positions, including the Supreme Court seats, subject to popular vote in this Sunday. And I would like to say that this decision will go from 9 to 12 years, because that's the period of time of each position. So also, we will have another judicial election in 2027. We're talking about that in 2025, half of the judiciary will be elected, and the other half will be elected in 2027. So this has very deep implications for the rule of law and the fight against organized crime. With that in mind, our first speaker is Carlota Ramos, Deputy Division Head at the Mexican President's Office. Thank you, Carlota, for being here. I would like to ask you, what is your perspective on the judicial election?
Thank you so much, Alonso, Rebecca, and the Inter-American Dialogue for the invitation, and everyone who is joining us today. I think this is a very important conversation. I think that the fundamental premise that we should build upon is that a judicial reform was necessary. Maybe not exactly in these terms, and there are a lot of challenges, but the Mexican justice system was widely recognized as plagued by opacity, nepotism, inefficiency, and deep-rooted corruption. Pretending that it could be fixed from within was no longer viable, even though there were strong efforts to do so in the past. They were not consolidated. So this reform did not emerge from ideological whims, but from a long-standing demand to democratize and clean up the judicial system. While some political actors may try to instrumentalize the reform, its core purpose is institutional, to dismantle barriers and open the door to real judicial renewal. Personally, I had no involvement in the political negotiation of this reform, but as someone who has worked for years in the justice system, in the Supreme Court, and now in justice system design, I believe it offers a historic opportunity to address structural problems. And I say these even though I recognize the strong challenges that it may pose. However, we are no longer talking about a reform. We are talking about our reality. This is in our Constitution. As Rebecca was telling us, the elections are taking place in 4 days. So we must assume that, and with that in mind, build from that, build forwards. So this is not just a reform to select judges. This opens the way for us to rethink of the entire administration and delivery of justice, especially at the local level. We should use this as a catalyzer to push for reforms in prosecution, access to legal aid, court infrastructure, and professionalization of justice operators, including civic justice, especially because reducing impunity, increasing accountability, and improving access to justice are not and should not be theoretical goals. They're urgent needs for both Mexicans and Mexico's international partners. If implemented carefully, this could strengthen the rule of law and generate long-term certainty, both for citizens and for foreign investors. And we should also own the fact that we have a strong responsibility in this process, we as citizens, because this reform is happening during a period of political and electoral uncertainty in both Mexico and the U.S., which understandably raises questions about institutional stability. But uncertainty can also create windows of opportunity. This is a good moment to rethink and modernize the USMCA Treaty's institutional framework, especially on dispute resolution and conflict resolution. The rule of law is a pillar of USMCA, the treaty, and a renewed citizen-centered judicial system could strengthen investor confidence if paired with transparent and real checks and balances, which is why I believe that one of the most promising components of this transformation is the increased use of mediation and alternative dispute resolution mechanisms, especially in commercial matters. ADR offers speed, cost efficiency, and flexibility, crucial elements for U.S. and international businesses and Mexican businesses operating in Mexico. So this is a window of opportunity that should be taken, because in a country where courts have historically been slow and unreliable, ADR mechanisms are key to ensuring timely, fair conflict resolution between private parties. Because this shift not only benefits investors, it also reduces pressure on the court system. So, for example, local or federal courts may now focus on higher impact criminal cases or constitutional cases, which is very important, and they have a higher impact on society as a whole. The long-standing perception that Mexico lacks legal predictability stems from decades of closed, self-protecting judicial structures. Opening the system with strong regulatory safeguards has the potential to create a more transparent, professional, and responsive judiciary. This is not just good for Mexico's democratic health. It's also strategic for North American integration, where judicial effectiveness plays a key role in economic competitiveness and regional security, which at the end of the day is one of the priorities of both of our governments. Now, these views are my own. I'm not here as a representative of the government, but as a concerned citizen who understands the challenges that this reform poses, but also recognizes the opportunities that it presents. So we must understand the responsibilities that we as citizens have in the outcomes of this following elections.
Thank you so much, Carlota. You are talking about some pretty good points, but we are also joined by Luis Carlos Ugalde, who is CEO of Integralia and former president of the Federal Electoral Institute from 2003 to 2007. Luis Carlos, thank you so much for being here. What can you tell us about this election?
Good morning. I obviously agree that the judiciary requires a reform. Absolutely, I agree with that. My only difference is that not this type of reform, because of course there is a corruption problem, but I don't see how this new system can solve that problem. Let me remind you that in 2022, President López Obrador, the architect of this reform, 2 years before proposing this, he signed into law a reform made by the president of the Supreme Court, Arturo Saldívar, who is a promoter of this reform as well, they both agreed in a reform that, according to them, was going to reduce and eliminate corruption within the judiciary. They say that, and 2 years later, for some reason, they basically recognize that what they had proposed didn't work out, and they come with this new reform. So let me make some comments about what I see as problematic, and then we can go and talk about some specifics. The first idea is that, for me, the very idea of electing judges by popular vote is problematic from a democratic point of view. We in Mexico, as you in the United States, have a separation of power system. That is the system that we provided Mexicans in the 1917 Constitution. That is the Constitution that every politician that is sworn in office, from the president to the municipal level, has to respect. And that Constitution establishes that the role of the judiciary is not to represent the people. Judges do not represent the people. Their role is to make the Constitution legal, to guarantee all Mexicans that the legal is abiding by for all, that we all respect the norms and the rules of the game. That is the function of judges. So confusing that we will be more democratic if we elect judges is simply to transform, to put it upside down, the system of the separation of powers. This is the most relevant reflection that we have to make. We are not going to be more democratic if we elect the judges. We are going to be less democratic if we believe the system established in the Constitution of 1917 in Mexico. So this is the main problem of the reform. And second, that this, of course, is going to transform the profile, the functioning, and the rationale of the judicial system in Mexico. And this is the first thing I want to mention. We are destroying the foundation of our democratic system. And this is not my opinion. This is the opinion of the Constitution of Mexico. If we believe in a separation of powers system, if we believe in the idea that the judiciary has to make laws respected by the people and by the power and by the governments as a main issue. That is the most important. The second discussion I want to bring to the table is the speed and the logistics of this election. The scope, the size, the implication of this reform are of such magnitude that the country would have needed maybe 10 years or 20 years to digest, to implement, to do it rightly. If we were to do this, if this is a reality, then let's do it finally. Let's do it in the correct way. But doing this in 8 months, because once this reform was approved in the month of October of last year to today, 8 months. What was the need to do this in such a small time span? Why? Why not take 10 years to begin implementing this and to have the time to see what works, what doesn't? We could have begun with the Supreme Court with 3 justices maybe, and then going down step by step. In the month of October, one justice proposed to the Supreme Court that maybe instead of electing all judges by popular vote, he proposed just to elect the Supreme Court, the disciplinary tribunal, and the electoral tribunal, just those 3 instances by popular vote, but leave the rest of the judiciary intact as it works today. If that had happened, and that was a great opportunity for this administration to say, okay, doing all at once, as it is now happening, presents many challenges, many risks. It is impossible from a logistical point of view. Let's go step by step. But no, they decided to go all along. And now we are facing the problems of trying to do something of this magnitude in such a small period of time. Another problem of this is that we are going to elect judges as if they were members of Congress. And let me explain to you. In Mexico, the National Elections Institute has an electoral geography in which we work within 3 federal electoral districts, and the organization of elections in Mexico occurs within that structure. 3 electoral districts, because in each one of them we elect 1 member of Congress, 1 member of the House of Representatives. Okay. Now, judges have a different functions. Since they do not represent the people, they don't represent nothing. Judges represent the Constitution, but we have to use what we have, which is this geographical structure, to elect judges. The problem is that there is no coincidence in the way judges have their offices in Mexico and the way we elect deputies and senators in Mexico. So the National Elections Institute has had to do some sort of magical engineering to elect judges using this geographical structure, and what has resulted is crazy, because you are going to elect it. Let me give you an idea. You are going to elect 1 judge in Mexico City, in 1 neighbor in Mexico City, and that judge is going to provide services, judiciary services to persons, to enterprises across Mexico. Why are some citizens in Mexico City going to decide the destiny of persons, enterprises that are going to subject to the jurisdiction of that judge? Simply because there was no other way, because the INE had no other choice. If 1 judge is established in Mexico City, because in Mexico cities, the judiciary is established in Mexico City. Mexico City is the capital of the country. So by administrative reasons, many decades ago, the judiciary decided that many judges, the offices and the residence of many of the judges, it was going to be Mexico City simply because of that. But those judges attend cases all across Mexico. But now those judges with jurisdiction across Mexico are going to elect by a very small number of citizens who, by the way, may never have any direct relationship with what does she or this or that judge. And this is one of the main problems of this reform. Then the resources. This is going to be the biggest election in Mexico by the number of positions to be elected at the federal level, 881. In 2024, which was a national election, we elected 629 positions. This time, 881 plus local judges. So this is the biggest election ever. Yes, however, the administration and the Mexican Congress decided to allocate half of those resources. So the INE is going to install half of the polling places that it used to do in a national election. So this, of course, will induce less participation. It will be more problematic to vote. And this, of course, restrains the ability to universal suffrage. But let me tell you that I would say that the main problem this Sunday, and I'm going to go to the polls, of course, more because I want to personally experience what it means to go to the most absurd election in Mexico. And let me tell you, In my case, and in the case of most Mexicans, we have to select around 45 to 50 persons this Sunday. 45 to 50. I don't have any knowledge of any election in the world in which one elector has to go and select 45 or 50 people. In Mexico last year, which will have a very big election, every Mexican, on average, elected 6 people: the president, a senator, a deputy, a mayor, a governor, and something else. Now we have to decide the destiny of 50 people, 50. And why? Because we're going to select 9 justices of the Supreme Court, 5 members of the Disciplinary Judiciary Tribunal, a newly elected body, then 2 members of the Electoral Tribunal, then 5 members of the Regional Electoral Tribunal, and then many judges and many magistrates of circuit, and then local judges. So in my case, I'm going to receive 9 ballot papers, 9. The first of them, which is the Supreme Court, I will have to choose 9 numbers. Why numbers? Because it is impossible to use, because there are 64 candidates. And then the best way to do this for the INE was to ask voters to write numbers in the top of the ballot paper. You're going to write the numbers of a long list that will be in the ballot paper. 9 people. The second ballot paper I'm going to receive is the one for the Tribunal of Disciplinary, the Tribunal of Judicial Discipline, which I have to choose 5 people out of 38 candidates. Second, the third one will be 15 candidates. I have to select 2 out of 15, and so on and so on. So I asked you, do you think it is reasonable to expect a voter in Mexico or in anywhere in the world to be able to understand what these people do, first? Second, to analyze 293 biographies, which is my case, 283 biographies of people, and then decide who are the best, and then go to the polls and write the numbers of 50 people that fit this rule. I mean, I have spent my whole life analyzing politics in Mexico. I was president of Mexico's Elections Institute for many years. I have studied these issues for 35 years now, and I myself find very difficult this challenge. So in my case, I'm going to go to the polls, and what I find reasonable for me, maybe I would have to study more, maybe I should sleep less, what I find very difficult for me, then I'm going to do something which is I'm going just to choose maybe 10, 15 names out of the 50 I have to choose to make a reasonable voting experience. So structurally speaking, it's impossible to have voters to go and do a reasonable job. It is impossible to do that. And this brings me to the final point, which is that is why we are seeing now in Mexico that political parties, governments, governors are basically distributing acordeones, which are informational sheets in which basically parties are telling people how to vote. And basically what they say, for the Supreme Court, these are the 9 numbers, for the tribunal, these 3 numbers, and then most voters this Sunday are going to come to the polls and copy numbers in ballot papers. This is what is going to happen. Then at the end of the day, this idea that democracy could empower the judiciary, that democracy could reduce the corruption of the system is not going to work, simply because the way this Sunday's election is going to occur, simply because it is impossible to vote freely. It is impossible to make an informed choice, and this is what is going to happen, according to my perspective. And I also want to underline, as I began, that of course the judiciary requires a reform, but not this type of reform. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Luis Carlos. Those are pretty good numbers about what's going on in this election. But I would like to know, Carlota, considering that we have a problem with justice in Mexico and that people do not feel that is accessible, do you think this election makes it easier for people to understand how justice works?
I would just like to say to Luis Carlos that I understand a lot of the points before I answer your question. And I understand why there are so many concerns, but I think that it is very important that we move forwards. All of these criticisms are very understandable, but I honestly don't think this is the time to pose those anymore. I think that it is a time to build forwards and understand that this is a reality and that we are not changing it with these criticisms. So we have to assume what we have to do from now on. Saying that, regarding your question, I think that one of the positive impacts that this judicial reform has had is that it has reduced the gap between those people who judge and the people who are administrating justice for, because it has required candidates for different positions to go into the streets and listen to the demands of the people. And that is, in my opinion, always a positive thing, because to understand what people are going through and to listen to what their demands are, how the judicial system has failed them, will also sensitize them as to what things need to change and how they need to administrate justice. So, like with a social justice, with gender perspective, with infants perspective, whatever they may need. And in this, I believe that a lot of people have become closer to the people. And the other side is that the people in the streets are listening to what justice actually means, because, and I have seen this in several campaigns in social media, for example, that the candidates go to markets, to different plazas, to different spaces, and they get near the people and they explain to them what they want to do. And I think that is a very honorable behavior, because it requires a lot of effort. And one thing I agree with Luis Carlos, this has been very, very fast. This has not been, like, we have not had enough time to actually digest what is going on. And in this regards, having the candidates go to the people explaining what is happening has had a positive impact, because it gets us closer. Like, as public servants, we need to understand that we are here to serve. And in order to be able to serve the people, we need to listen to them, to understand what they need, how the system has failed them, and on the contrary, that the people understand what justice actually means, how these tribunals work, what an administrative magistrate does, or a civil magistrate, or criminal judge. Now, there are very different areas of the judicial system that are very complex, and this, I believe, has shortened that gap between the people who are serving and administrating justice and those who require and are in need of justice.
Great. So and just before asking Luis Carlos some specifics, you were talking about that this election could mean a transition to alternative means of dispute resolution. Could that be considered a success, even if it stems from a rejection from the judiciary?
I don't believe it's a rejection of the judiciary. I think it's a very reasonable step towards a more fast and agile way to serve justice. the implementation of ADRs has been one of the priorities of the judiciary for a lot of years. However, has not been implemented correctly with that focus. And having private parties go through ADR mechanisms serves amazingly, because it is not a rejection of the judiciary. It's leading away to a more accurate, agile, flexible way of administrating justice without charging our judicial system with so many cases. So I believe it's a success in every single way. And it in no terms it implies a rejection. I think it's actually the opposite. So I think it's profoundly positive.
Perfect. So now, Luis Carlos, you, of course, pointed many of the problems in the design of this election from the top to the bottom. But we cannot deny that this is now part of the Constitution. Could there be a better way to organize this type of election?
Before answering your question, let me tell you that I see Carlota's comments very welcoming. She says that we need to look forward. I agree in some aspects with that. Her tone and her disposition to discuss this and her acceptance of some of the challenges of this reform are very positive for talking. And this should be the attitude of the administration of the Mexican Congress. But the problem is that for the rest of the people that do not think like the administration or the architects of the reform, they are the conservatives, they are the opposition, they don't have the right to talk. So this is very problematic to try to find ways to solve this, because this is a reality. This is going to be with us for 20 years. But if people like Carlota were more influential in the way things are discussed in Mexico, we could bring together more people trying to help. I just want to mention that because this creates a new room to talk, and I am happy to hear Carlota telling this. There are many ways to improve this reform, of course. In 2027, which is the second half of the election, because now we are going to elect 881 federal judges and ministers and magistrates, but the second half comes in 2027. So why not to take the experience of this election this Sunday and then try to improve the system for that election? In many ways, how you elect, what is the jurisdiction, what is the geography, how many you elect in 2027. Maybe we should simply make it in a longer period of time. What judges should be subject to vote and who doesn't. I don't see that you have to elect everyone. And so there are opportunities to change the system within the new paradigm of popular vote. But popular vote doesn't have to be for all judges. Maybe we should simply reduce the scope of the reform. So we can improve this, of course. In 2027, by the way, and this is very relevant, we are going to have a national election. For the Mexican Congress, we are going to renew 16 or 17 governorships. In Mexico, we're going to elect mayors in 31 states. So that is going to be a very big election in its own terms. If we want to add the judicial election as well to that very big election, it's going to be a disaster. In this time, in this moment, this is very problematic. What we only have elections in 2 states, Durango and Veracruz, and for mayors. But imagine 2027 with this, because at the same time, according to the law, according to this reform, political parties cannot participate in the election of judges. So in 2027, you would need polling places for electing candidates of political parties, and then a parallel system of polling places for electing judges in which political parties cannot be present. So imagine that system, that parallel system is going to be impossible. Of course, there has to be a reform of this reform. So it would be very good if the government, after this Sunday's election, had a new attitude, saying, okay, this is a reality, there are good and bad things, let's work together, let's find ways to improve that. Unfortunately, what I perceive and what I see is that the natural, the automatic reaction of the administration is going to say that everything was fine, that the people decided, and that all the mistakes made were problem of the elections institute, of the opposition, and this is going to be maybe one reason to polarize even more. That is what I believe is going to happen. I would like for the administration to take up an opportunity to say, let's work together and improve this. And then the environment, the attitude of the critics would change. Not of all of them, but many of them would say, okay, let's go, come together, make things right. That would be a very good signal after this Sunday's elections, but I think it is unlikely to occur.
Great, thank you so much. And before I open the floor to some questions of the audience regarding the USMCA agreement, I think Rebecca has a question regarding some topic.
Hi, yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. So yeah, I have a question about this new systems, its impact on kind of the subnational level, on municipal and state level governance. And in particular, the ability of organized crime to exert influence. And it seems that here the stakes are particularly high at the subnational level, you know, in areas where with the highest exposure to organized crime, you know, where we see criminal groups that may have captured government institutions. So are there, and this could be a question for all three of you, thinking about that, are there safeguards that you can imagine that could potentially mitigate things like threats to candidates, you know, forcing them to withdraw, or something we've heard about is this idea of, you know, financing criminal groups, perhaps financing pliable candidates in exchange for favorable treatment. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. And again, like if there are things that can be done to mitigate this potential.
So go ahead, please.
Let me make my comment. We have a problem of political violence in Mexico. On the front of this election, of this judiciary election, there has been no violence at all until now. There have been some killings, but for the local election of mayors in Veracruz, which is a separate election, but for the judiciary election, we haven't had any problem of violence. Now, the problem is not absent because it is logical that organized criminal groups would have approached people, judges, candidates, which are important to them. Not all of them. They don't care about the Supreme Court. They care about judges which decide things that are important to them, like extraditions, like preventive jail, or things particular to them. And these are mainly the case of judges in the sphere of the penal code, criminal law, some administrative issues. So especially in criminal law, criminal judges, those are the ones, and in specific regions in Mexico, which decide extraditions, cases, sentences. And so maybe many of these candidates for these positions have already been approached by criminal groups. Maybe they are funding. Maybe they are going to mobilize voters to the polls this Sunday. We don't know that, but it is likely, it is logical for that to happen. Now, the question is, under the current system, that happened? Yes, it happened. So the solution is to elect those judges by vote? No, because they are more vulnerable. What is the solution then? Well, the solution then would be to make judges, to protect them from this influence, to make attorney general's offices more professional. By the way, this is a pending reform. What are we going to do with the investigation, with the fiscalías in Mexico? Because part of the problem of sentencing criminals to jail, it depends on the ability of these investigations to go to be done in a professional and with due process. So, but that is a different discussion. But yes, it is likely that that these groups are already influencing, and maybe it's not going to be very much from the past. But what I see now is that it is easier to approach the system when you elect judges by popular vote.
Thank you, Carlos. Carlota, would you like to say something?
Yes, I understand the concern around organized crime infiltrating state institutions in Mexico, because as Luis Carlos said, as Rebecca was saying, it is a real risk. However, in the current system, the risk is not only present, it's also invisible, because we now have entire local courts and tribunals that have been effectively captured by organized crime, like this financing to obtain favorable judgments and threatening the judges is already happening in a lot of subnational entities, and we need to address that. I believe that this new system allows us, for those profiles who are linked to organized crime, to come out into light and be publicly scrutinized. That's exactly what happened with some of the candidates who were publicly announced to have links to the organized crime. And now we get to know that they may be a possibility that they get to be judges or magistrates, and we get to not vote for them. So unlike the current system where citizens have absolutely no idea what is actually happening, it's completely obscure, it's an opaque system and this is already happening, and it is already damaged. It is one of the reasons why our judicial system is very damaged right now. There are no mechanisms in place to stop this. With the disciplinary tribunal, which actually has real powers of oversight and removal, there is a possibility that they will in fact take charge of these possibilities, and that something will be done and should be done. So if we elect competent people to the positions of the disciplinary tribunal, which is why it's so important to inform ourselves, especially in those tribunals, in like the Supreme Court and the disciplinary tribunal, they can finally begin to break the cycles of impunity and collusion from the inside. So I understand and I agree the risk exists, but the real question is whether we keep on hiding it behind closed doors, or whether we expose it to the sunlight and public scrutiny, as has happened. So yes, there are many things that can be done in order to avoid this, and allowing the people to know that there is this link, that this is actually happening, helps to push forward other policies that can prevent this from happening in the future.
Great, and you are talking kind of the theme about independency of the judges, and with that, I would like to ask you, because the audience is pretty interested in the U.S. Mexico Canada trade agreement. Is the independency threatened in any way by this method to choose the judiciary, and in consequence, Mexico would need to modify this agreement, this international agreement, or what do you think?
I think
My
that-
perspective.
sorry.
Sorry. No, sorry. Go ahead, Carlota,
Go
please.
ahead, Luis Carlos. No, please go ahead. It's okay. I'll go after.
My perspective is that this does not violate directly the USMCA, because in no part of the treaty says that you cannot elect judges by popular vote. So this is one explanation. However, there is an argument that can be brought to the table, which says that popular vote will politicize the judiciary, and then the judiciary will be less able to protect the rights of investors in Mexico, because one and many reasons can flow out from that. That is possible, and it will be brought to the table. And that there are many areas in the Mexican system that will be part of this discussion. For example, in the last few months, there have been reforms to the Constitution to eliminate the nature of some regulatory bodies which used to be independent, autonomous from a constitutional perspective, and now they will be part of the administration. This could create some concerns that then these regulators are going to be less able to implement neutral regulation in the competition system in Mexico. And then this will be part of the discussion, but in one way, there is no violation. However, we understand that the Trump administration doesn't care about reasons, doesn't care about that. And I am sure they will bring to the table that how can you guarantee the rights of my companies operating in Mexico when you are having these changes to your system? For example, one case in which I believe there is going to be a huge discussion is in terms of the enterprises, the Mexican enterprises in the energy sector, Pemex and the Federal Electricity Commission, because in those cases, the new system, the system establishes that these two companies, we have a privileged position in terms of competition within the energy sector. And this, of course, creates discrimination in terms of trade and investment in Mexico. That is going to be very problematic. And I believe that this judiciary reform is going to create concerns and will be one additional element for the Trump administration to put pressure on Mexico.
What do you think, Carlota?
Thank you. I think that judicial independence is not about how judges are selected, either appointed or elected. It's about how they operate once they are in office, which again leads me to reiterate the importance of why we need to go and vote and inform ourselves on who we are voting for. I understand it may be challenging, but it is extremely important. And it is part of the responsibility that we as citizens have to inform ourselves on who are the candidates and vote for the people who we believe are the best to serve justice and to administer justice. Now, in addition, I think that the current system has not guaranteed true independence at all. And it has often protected privilege, not autonomy. And there has been groups of power who have influenced a lot of the decisions that magistrates, judges make in Mexico, especially pertaining businesses. So again, it is not really about the selection process of the judges. It's more about how we regulate them once they're there, and how they actually administrate justice. So this is also, as I like to see it with a more positive light, an opportunity to properly regulate the job that they are doing, the judges, the magistrates, in order to increase the legitimacy without compromising their autonomy. So that is part of the agenda that we as concerned citizens need to push towards, because right now we do not have a guarantee of judicial independence, nor will we have it if we do not push towards it. However, there is an institutional framework in this with this new reform in order to guarantee judicial integrity. But we do have a very strong responsibility as citizens to push for that. So I think that's, yeah.
Thank you so much, Carlota. Well, of course, this is a topic very with so many questions. We definitely have big challenges in justice in Mexico, and since now we will define it with popular vote, we now have challenges in electoral matters as well, as both of our panelists recognize. I believe that as citizens, we do have an obligation to help improving this process in every way we can, either as a public officer or from the non-governmental organizations. We have limited time for this webinar, so all I can say is that we will be watching the election results closely to learn more about the effects. I would like to thank the dialogue for this space. I believe that this is pretty important in keeping strong the relationship within Mexico and the United States. So thank you so much, Rebecca. Thank you, Carlota. Thank you, Luis Carlos. This webinar was recorded and will be available on the Dialogue website for your reference if any of you want to watch it. Thank you very much and have a great day.